it's also, that issue of, we don't have an infinite supply of resources, which is obvious. So when we go and make those sort of commitments, something has to give. I mean, that's the study of economics, right? We have a lot of needs, but very limited resources, and we need to make some of those tough decisions.
Well, can I ask you this? Who actually is teaching the elective courses?
Which elective? Electives in terms of...
In general, is it teachers who actually are math teachers, but they pick up a specialty in an elective, so perhaps they do have that extra period where they're teaching an elective?
There are very few electives in any of our core subject areas. In history, we have sociology, contemporary history, minorities, in history, and sociology, which is 4 areas that are all part-time. In math, we don't have any electives, but if a kid takes a 4th year of math, technically it would count as an elective. In science, anatomy, and physiology could count as an elective, but besides that, there are no other science electives taking place. And if you look at English, we only offer creative writing, there's a film and oral communications. So there's very few electives in the core content areas. Those electives would be courses that require certification in family consumer science, art, so on and so forth. So there are very few electives that we're offering at a core content area, and that was due to much reduction in the staff 2-3 years ago when we took 4 or 5 science, 4 or 5 English, 4 or 5 history, and so on and so forth. And so we have the core offerings in those areas, and the electives tend to be those other content areas, which are also need to be offered under Chapter 4. You need to have those offerings available to students. It doesn't mean everyone has to take them, but they need to be offered to students. So those are your areas of art and performing arts and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Mr. Kopp, right here. I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly when I heard you say just a while ago that there was potential for students to take science in 9th, 10th, and 12th grade. Is that correct?
Because a student is required to take 3 years, there are some students who may opt to take a different course other than science in their 11th grade year. But then they must take, in their 12th grade year, that science requirement. I would say that is a very small percentage of our students at the high school. Typically, they take a science in 9, 10, and 11, but they could opt to take it in 12th instead. And welcome aboard, Mr. Vandenberg.
Thank you very much. Now, in continuation to that question, that small percent that may opt to take a break, per se, during the 11th grade year, from an academic standpoint, wouldn't that jeopardize their learning process in the 12th grade year, having that gap in learning sciences?
It depends on the subject matter. Some of the subject matter builds in physical science that you learn in inner space, and some of it builds into the biological science and preparations for chemistry, or chemists might argue the chemistry should become before the biology. It's philosophical in nature, but if a student takes earth and space, takes biology, and then takes a year off and takes chemistry the following year, I don't perceive it being a big loss of understanding or they'll be behind track. Typically, it becomes a math issue, chemistry and physics, more so than not having a biological background. But I'm not a science teacher, just a principal.
Okay, and one more question for you. What justification is there, if any, for the honors and AP classes having the extended lab periods and the on-level classes not having those periods? What I'm really trying to ask is, don't you think that the on-level classes may benefit from those labs also?
Part of the creation of the schedule was to balance out what is currently being offered to our students in terms of time. So if a student has 8 options in their day, a typical on-level CP student, honors and AP student, would then be able to get what they need in terms of their schedule. By increasing the science, although that would also increase staff, as I mentioned before to Mr. Ryder, it would show an interest in science. Typically what we have the advanced placement and honors for, though, is students who will go on to post-secondary ed and pursue careers in that field. It isn't that the other students are getting slighted, is that these students have a genuine interest in this field of study, and in order to be majors in college in this, they need more expertise and a stronger background than a typical well-rounded college prep student would need. Okay.
Michael, thank you.
Okay. Having some fun here tonight. Yes, I stepped on Bill's toes. That being said, if there's nothing else for the academics, I'll just ask if there's any comments from the public. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Jill Nathanson, here to talk about science in the curriculum. I know a lot of students don't like science. You know, I get that. There are students who don't like every subject. I think sometimes they fail to understand how science is a part of every day in their lives. Science is why when they wake up in the morning, they don't go out and milk the cows and raise the crops. It's why they have a bus to take to school. It's why you're all sitting here with laptops and microphones. It's why Mr. Drago and his team have a job. There's so much to science, and students don't understand that a lot of times. And I think one of the things that gets students excited about science is the opportunity for science fairs. And we do have some science fairs haphazardly in the elementary schools. A lot are actually run by PTAs and not run by the school themselves. And after elementary school, it sort of dies down. And unless it's changed, my daughter didn't get another opportunity for science fair until 8th grade when it was required in her science class. And I know it's required in 8th, 9th, and 10th for her. I don't know if it's required for her outside of that time period. She just finished 10th grade today, so I don't know all the requirements, you know, as she's changed or she hasn't been there yet. But science fairs are incredible. You go and you see these huge groups of students who are excited about science and have such creative experiments every time my daughter goes. And yes, she complains every day up until the day she has to show up there about the workload, but then she goes and she sees what everybody else does and she gets excited.